Welcome to part 2 of Dangerous Tides, the case of the Bermuda Triangle. For those of you who are new here, we've been discussing ships associated with or rumored to have been through the Bermuda Triangle. This is the area between the coast of Florida and the Caribbean islands, aptly named for the locations in which it forms a triangle: Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. This week, we'll discuss another ship of the Carolinas associated with the Bermuda Triangle, but instead of simply just passing through, as speculated with the Carol A. Deering, this ship didn't even hit the first point. We'll now discuss the SS Cotopaxi, where we sail on dangerous tides. When Steven Spielberg filmed and released Close Encounters of the Third Time, his use of the SS Cotopaxi's disappearance as a major plot device opened up an astonishing can of worms for those who were living relatives and crew, and legitimate maritime researchers who often scoffed at the theories that spawned from this work of science fiction. Despite the controversy, in a paradoxical twist of fate, the renewed interest in the Cotopaxi has allowed it to be found and identified off the coast of St. Augustine, Florida. So how did this strange and tragic tale become such an urban legend? We set sail on dangerous tides to examine the fate of the Cotopaxi and her crew. The 5th of March, 1918, nearing the end of World War I, the SS Cotopaxi was commissioned by the United States Shipping Board, an emergency agency that sprung up to meet the wartime and post-war demand of materials across the Americas, primarily the transit of the Welland Canal. Named for the active volcano in Ecuador, the Cotopaxi was launched on November the 15th of 1918, and was ready to conduct operations upon arrival in Boston, Massachusetts on December the 22nd. It continued operations for the USSB until December 23rd, 1919, where the ship was purchased by Clinchfield Navigation Company, the maritime division of Clinchfield Fuel Company, for repurpose into distributing coal. During the SS Cotopaxi's tenure with the USSB, it had multiple incidents that were on an ominous sign of what was to come. On her maiden voyage from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Salvador de Bahia, Brazil, while being crewed by members of the Eastern Steamship Company on the 16th of June, 1919, the ship ran aground in the Baracana Channel. Despite the work of the crew for a month, the crew had to dispatch their entire cargo to get the Cotopaxi out of the channel. With heavy damage, the ship managed to sail to Para, Brazil, for repairs to the hull and engine on August 19th. On the 19th of June, 1920, the Cotopaxi would ram into and sink a tug in Cuba by the name of Saturno in an attempt to move in between two freighters on the way to Havana. 7 years later, on July 5th, a trial was held, and it was found that both the Cotopaxi and the Saturno were at fault in the incident. In December of 1920, the Cotopaxi was held up in Charleston, South Carolina, after it was found that there was whiskey on board during Prohibition. April of 1925, the ship spent a month in Staten Island, New York for routine maintenance before her final voyage. A carpenter for the Litchfield Navigation Company inspected the ship with the captain, one William J. Myers, and found that the wooden hatches of the Cotopaxi were in such a dreadful state. He complained to the main company about the state of the hatch covers. Before the hatches could be installed, the Cotopaxi was scheduled to set sail to Charleston, South Carolina, and would be forced to leave the new hatch covers on the dock before they could be installed. On November 27th, there was a tropical depression forming on the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula after the last month of the hurricane season ended. The day after, the Cotopaxi loaded a cargo of 3,890 tons of coal from the Charleston Coal Export Terminal. The tropical depression traveled eastward towards Florida, building in intensity to create a storm even the captain couldn't anticipate. The Cotopaxi departed Charleston on November 29, 1925, at 10 a.m., making good time and reporting its position off Florida the next day. In a twist of fate, the same tropical depression would arrive near the Cotopaxi's position, passing just south of Tampa. By the 1st of December, just 2 days after launch, the tropical depression made its way to Titusville, Florida, resulting in high-speed winds and tumultuous seas. At 7:15 p.m., Captain Myers had reported the ship was taking on water, eventually reporting 10 minutes later that the conditions were worsening. However, no SOS was issued, nor was the ship's location given. This would be the last time anyone would hear from the SS Cotopaxi or the crew. Both transmissions would be received in Jacksonville and Orlando, Florida. The storm would head on a parallel course with the ship, traveling north up the east coast of the United States. Another vessel, the steam yacht Miramar, was lost en route from Charleston, South Carolina to Palm Beach, Florida, on the same day. Other ships lost on that day included the schooner Arcadia, the tug Guala, and the schooner William Russell. A rum runner was also lost that evening as much of its illicit cargo started washing up on the beach the morning after. On December 2nd, 1925, the storm moved closer to where the USS Pagoda was located as they reported 90-mile-an-hour winds while cruising past the Carolinas. The storm would reach New York on December 3rd with 65-mile-an-hour winds. This was considered the deadliest tropical storm that never developed into a full hurricane. At the time, it was the third tropical storm that had developed after November 1st in the North Atlantic. The storm would eventually travel across the Atlantic before disappearing near the Azores. On the 4th of December 1925, the Cotopaxi was considered missing, with the Coast Guard beginning its search with vessels based in Key West. Streamers from New York had also joined vessels from Florida to cover the eastern seaboard from Norfolk, Virginia to Havana, Cuba. The search would conclude 4 days later with no sign of the Cotopaxi. 2 days into the search, the government would advise all mariners to keep an eye out, but the father of Captain William Myers, Joseph G. Myers, had reported he had given up hope of finding his son alive. 3 days after the search was called off, on December 11th, the ship was listed as overdue by Lloyd's of London, the marine insurance firm for the Cotopaxi. Many rumors would spread about the disappearance of the Cotopaxi for the next century after its loss, from the crew falsely reporting it safe in Havana to being en route back to Charleston, to the wildly inaccurate claim of being lost in the Bermuda Triangle. The disappearance even caught the attention of noted seaman's lawyer Silas Blake Axtell, an early advocate for mariners' rights who is responsible for many of the rights and benefits merchant sailors have today. On the 30th of March, 1926, Axtell would file suit on behalf of the crew's families for $1 million worth of damages. That would be $18 million in today's money. Not all of the families that were involved in the suit, as Axtell would eventually file suit for $700,000 on behalf of the crew of the Miramar against its owner, E.M. Sattler. The suit against Litchfield Navigation would not be tried until January of 1928. Axtell himself gave multiple arguments about how the Cotopaxi shouldn't have been considered seaworthy in court, which was how the story of the hatch was later revealed by the carpenter for the Cotopaxi, C.N. Coates. However, Coates was considered an unreliable witness due to the lawyer appearing to confuse him in the transcript, thus not giving his testimony a proper look. Clitchfield successfully argued that the Cotopaxi was seaworthy at the time it had left Charleston. It had sunk due to the severity of the storm instead of company negligence. The case concluded on January 25, 1928. This was also during a time of a Red Scare in the United States, and Axtell had what was considered radical ideas. Despite filing an appeal, Axtell's personal life and behavior in court during the Miramar case would not only result him in being held in contempt of court, but he would be disbarred 2 years later. Thus, the families never received closure. The SS Cotopaxi would eventually catch the attention of Agressy magazine's Vincent Gaddis 40 years later, who would leave out all the crucial context in regard to the Cotopaxi and only mentioned it once in the story about the Bermuda Triangle. Though he was correct that the ship was lost, the use of the Cotopaxi had a long-standing impact on the relatives of the crew. Because of this work of science fiction, it eventually caught the attention of crackpot investigators into the Bermuda Triangle. Despite Gaddis himself saying that many of the incidents mentioned happened outside of the triangle, it captured the American zeitgeist and conspiracy, and the myth of the triangle swallowed up the Cotopaxi, along with the Deering and many other ships. In 1977, Close Encounters of the Third Kind would once again renew interest in the Cotopaxi after it was shown in the movie to have been left derelict in the Gobi Desert. This time, newer generations of maritime researchers would follow up on Axtell's evidence and investigation. 3 years later, a ship known as the Bear Wreck would be found off the coast of St. Augustine by Florida divers. Eventually, one of these divers, Michael Burnett, would take the records left by Axtell and Lloyd's of London and confirm it with the St. Augustine Lighthouse and Maritime Museum that this could be the location where the Cotopaxi sank. Burnett, with a team of divers including Al Perkins and Joe Cietti, two divers that have been regulars at the Bear Wreck, took measurements to compare with the original blueprints of the Cotopaxi, along with video footage at the Bear Wreck's location to compare with photographs. Exchanging their findings with the Lighthouse Archaeological Maritime Program in St. Augustine, they eventually confirmed that this was indeed the Cotopaxi at the bottom of the sea floor, giving restitution to the living relatives of the crew and confirming the arguments Axtell had long ago. Clinchfield Navigation Company had a long history of negligence in the maintenance and upkeep of their ships, including the Cotopaxi. Although the company was not found to be at fault with the defective hatch covers on the ship, they had lost another vessel, the SS Northwestern, under similar circumstances. The Northwestern was deemed to be unseaworthy as it had broken apart in a less severe storm. The sinking, along with the insurance fraud that the Clitchfield Navigation Company was found to have engaged in during a later trial on behalf of the surviving crew and the crew member's family, would give credence to Axtell's arguments. This allowed the Cotopaxi to be found almost 100 years later, thanks to the long paper trail that was left behind. Much of the mystery surrounding the triangle has been lost, likely due to advances in weather, maritime, and communications engineering. Most can easily be explained away by a storm or human error in some capacity. Still, whether you believe the theories surrounding the triangle or not, there is no denial that the history still captivates many imaginations in the United States and perhaps the world. With this in mind, we can now put the theory of the Bermuda Triangle to rest, along with the crews of the ships lost at sea. May the fair winds guide you through dangerous tides.